Well, today we have somebody that's going to help us understand money. And I really value this gentleman because he not only is a radio talk show host, but he writes a lot of books. And today we want to talk to him about the art and science of American money and how our money is created and why it matters, and give us a little bit of a feel about the debt crises that we're in and what America's money is all about. Chuck Morse is with us today, and you can pick up his show on the USA Radio Network, the Chuck Morse Speaks. Chuck, nice to have you with you, friend.
Thank you, Perry. Thanks for having me aboard.
Yeah. Fascinating topic. You know, we're all watching this debt just mount. How can you help us get our head around this? I don't think any of us understands $16 trillion, soon to be $17 trillion.
Well, Perry, I write from a historic standpoint, and I discovered that there's a strain that runs through American history all the way from colonial times up to the present that involves this battle, this conflict between those who have advocated what I call constitutional money, public money, U.S. notes, which are issued interest-free by the U.S. Treasury, and those who advocate a private money system run by private bankers and investors, both domestic and international, who then loan us our money at interest and charge us for the privilege. That's what we have now in this country, and that's under the Federal Reserve System. Now, I'm not here to point fingers of accusation. I'm simply pointing out that the system of money in this country is one that is antiquated. It goes back to the days of the feudal times. It's not consonant with a free society, as I discover. And that's why we have this debt, because our Congress, rather than simply issuing money directly into the currency and paying for goods and services that are reflective of the gross national product and that is interest-free, instead they go to this Fed and they borrow the money at interest, which means that they don't have to deal with the immediate effects of the inflation of their policies. That comes later. That comes with the devaluation of the dollar. And since the Fed's been in place, and it was founded in 1913, our dollar has been inflated 10 times, 20 times over, to the point where our dollar today only is worth a dime compared to what it was worth at the time of the founding of the Fed. It's also led to a massive increase in debt amongst you and I, the citizen. We're up to our eyeballs in debt. We don't own anything. And that does not necessarily have to be the case. If we had a currency that was neutral, that was issued debt-free directly by Congress, which is what the Constitution calls for, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, Congress shall regulate coin and the value thereof, we would not have this debt. Our government could issue the currency and would realize taxation to such a degree that they could pay for all of the services that we want.
Wow. What has the whole idea of credit cards done to our thinking? Because it seems to me we made a philosophical, maybe even a moral shift when we took on credit cards as individuals.
I don't think there's anything wrong with borrowing money as long as one qualifies for it and as long as the bank agrees that a person can pay it back. The problem is that if you have an economy that's a debt economy with inflations and depressions and booms and busts and interest paid by taxation on the debt rather than money that's going directly to help the people, then you're going to have economic insecurity. You're going to have other people, private citizens in this case, deciding on the nature of our economy. And that puts us all in jeopardy. That means that we can all be involved with the consequences of bad policies. A recent example is the Federal Reserve policy in the 1990 with regard to the lowering of interest rates on mortgages, which allowed people to expand their debt and allowed people to get mortgages that really shouldn't have gotten them to the degree that was unprecedented. And then, of course, they pulled the rug out from under the whole thing in 2008 by calling in the debts, which had been too overextended, and everyone was left underwater. Now, if we had had a rational system based upon genuine capital accumulation, first of all, we wouldn't need that much debt. We wouldn't have to use that many credit cards because our dollar would be worth $1. Working man's dollar would be more oriented towards saving. Interest rates would be up to the degree that it would be worth it to have a private bank account. Now it isn't. My daughter has money in a savings account a fairly substantial amount of money, and she earns enough to maybe go to McDonald's. We should have a savings-oriented economy where our money actually accumulates compound interest, in which case we wouldn't need to have that much debt. We wouldn't need these credit cards as much.
Chuck, is what you're talking about, is it achievable? I mean, could we do this even though we're packing 16 trillion? Could we reverse this situation?
Yes, I believe we could, and I believe it could be done. First of all, I think there's going to have to be what they call in financial circles a national haircut. What that means is that on the federal level, on the state level, on the corporate level, and even on the private level, we're going to have to negotiate the debt to such a degree that the holders of debt will have to take a little bit less of the interest and even possibly the principal than they're taking, because there's just not enough money to pay $16 trillion in debt, and it's much bigger than that if you add up all of the leveraged debt against our pension funds and everything else. And then our federal government can simply issue currency, issue U.S. dollars, U.S. notes to a very moderate degree and very carefully as a way of paying off the rest of the national debt. And the way that would work in order to avoid inflation would be that the banks would be restricted gradually and within proportion from engaging in what's called fractional reserve banking. Simply what that means is that our banks are able to create money by simply moving a couple of blips on a computer screen. They just create it by issuing debt. They shouldn't be able to do that. They should only issue the money that they have in-house. They should issue real resources, real capital, and as such, they will not be able to inflate the currency. So it can be done in stages. I think it could take 5 years, and I'm not saying it would be painless, but the end result would be that we would have a dollar that was second to none, one that would preserve its value forever, one that would be regulated scientifically rather than through this private cartel of bankers, and one that would be the envy of the world.
Boy, you bring up a couple of things here before I run out of time. Number one, what can you say to the individual? I mean, it's hard for us to get our brains around the national problem when our own debt seems to be mounting. What do you say to the individual about their debt and how to get rid of it?
What I would say is that, like most of us, you're up to your eyeballs in debt. Most of us, except for maybe the top 1 or 2%, who are people who are connected to this international banking establishment. And again, I don't mean that to wag a finger of conspiracy. I don't do that. I'm simply pointing out that it's a system that is antiquated and it's not serving anyone, including the wealthiest. And that you're probably never going to get out of that kind of debt because we have a debt society. Our government is in debt. We're in debt. And our dollar is a debt instrument. It's not a savings instrument. If we change the dollar over to a savings instrument, then the price of goods and services are going to find their actual value. That's going to be stabilized. Your paycheck will find its actual value. That will be stabilized. And you're going to have a much easier time of getting out of debt, especially if you then go ahead and negotiate with the holders of your debt to get a settlement on those.
All right. Now, with all the IRS scandals going on, there's move now to, I say, abolish the IRS and maybe go to a flat tax. Does that begin this dialogue? Would that begin this kind of turnaround?
I think that we should get rid of the IRS and the 16th Amendment along with the Federal Reserve Act. But I don't think the answer is a flat tax or a national sales tax, because who gets to decide how high that'll be? The nature of that would be, I think it's just too dangerous. I would argue that we go back to the taxation system that existed before the 16th Amendment, which is proportional taxes granted by the states to the federal government, various imposts and what they call sin taxes, and tariffs. I mean, one of the first acts by President George Washington was to put a tax on whiskey. Now, I know it didn't work out that well because it was a whiskey rebellion, but nevertheless, that's how our government raised revenue. And I think that with a dollar that is a non-debt instrument, the government will receive plenty of revenue, probably more revenue than they even need. And they would be more oriented toward using that revenue in a way that actually enhances this country, rather than throwing it into these crazy projects that, if they did that, would be inflationary.
So how do we get this dialogue on a national scale? How do we get you sound very reasonable and very sound and very researched. How do we get this dialogue out there?
Well, I hope that my book can contribute to that, The Art and Science of American Money. I hope you don't mind if I mention available on Amazon Kindle.
Yeah.
And that, in fact, the whole discussion of currency and money was very common in this country for hundreds of years. It was part of every election, right up until maybe after the 1930s, when the subject seemed to have been, I wouldn't say suppressed, but most Americans don't think about it anymore. They don't understand the fact that the Federal Reserve, for example, is a private institution. It is a private consortium of banks. I hope to contribute to just simply reigniting a dialogue on what our money is and why it matters and how we can handle our money on a national level as part of our federal government, which is what should be done. The money should be handled by the federal government in the same way that the federal government handles such things as defense and law and order. I mean, it's a basic function of sovereignty that the nation is responsible, our elected representatives are responsible for determining the value of our currency. That's what the Constitution says. That's what the founding fathers expected. Abraham Lincoln did this when he issued greenbacks. Andrew Jackson did it when he got rid of the second bank. Jefferson, you should see some of the quotes I have from him. I mean, this isn't new. It's a struggle that's gone on throughout the entire history of this country. This need of the Americans government and the American people to take back our money.
Wow. All right, it's called The Art and Science of American Money, How Our Money is Created and Why It Matters. And you're saying it's available, Chuck, at Amazon on the Kindle download, right?
That is right. On Amazon Kindle, just put my name in the server, Chuck Morse, M-O-R-S-E, and you'll see it come up.
All right, how do we get to your other books? Do you have a website?
They're all on Amazon Kindle. There's a book page there. I've got 7 books. I've got an 8th one coming up soon. These are full-length books. They're not just pamphlets. Some of my books are 95,000 words. So this is a history of money in this country and the struggle, again, between public money, U.S. notes, and the private issuers of currency.
Well, terrific. Thank you. And I'd like to have you back when you get your new book out, and we can discuss it as well. Thanks for your time, Chuck. You're a delight, and keep up the good work, my friend.
It's been a pleasure and an honor, Perry. Thank you.